One of my favorite parts about Cardinal fandom is the angst slash celebration when you see players leave the organization and then do really well. And we'll get to Tyler O'Neill because the outfielder thing, we've done that now for 5 years.
That's
And it's
old
it's
news.
part right, it's part of a big bucket of outfielders that we'll discuss. But the Jordan Hicks thing I think is really interesting too. So if
Yes.
folks don't know, so in 3 starts, he's 2-0, 18 innings, only 13 strikeouts, but not walking folks. His whip is .8. And this just kind of gets back to the development of pitching. Now, we know that Jordan Hicks was a big time reliever when healthy, throwing 105, 106, really, really good reliever. But the fact that this guy could be a really good starter, and I think we both know the value of a really good starter is so much greater, especially if he's your own guy. You don't have to pay him for a while. Now, that's not the same situation. But it's just the fact that why early on is he having this success with the Giants as a starter? Remember, the Cardinals gave him a little bit of a shot as kind of a quasi opener a couple years ago. But, we've talked about this with Helsley. Could Helsley have been a good starter? Trevor Rosenthal always said he wished he could have been a starter. Who knows if Rosie could have been a good starter? We'll never really know the answer to that. But I think it's fascinating when you see a guy that the Cardinals early on said, you're a reliever. Now, freaking 6, 7 years later, becoming a damn good starter.
Yeah, and I think you have to look organizationally at the way that they've approached it. It's always been, hey, you can have a guy come up as a reliever, and then it doesn't exclude him from being a starter down the road. But the caveat to that is, it does exclude you in the Cardinals world if you throw 100, because they're never gonna put you back. They're gonna be too. They haven't been able to necessarily find the relievers to say, we don't need this guy who can throw 100 to be in our bullpen right now. We have the luxury to leave him in Memphis. We can have him develop as a starter. We can wait. They haven't really taken that approach. It's always been, get him up here, because otherwise, who's throwing the eighth? Who's throwing the ninth? And those guys end up doing really well at that because, well, they throw 100. But it is kind of one of those things that I think they just have taken for granted because of how good historically their defense has been. I think it's always been, pitch to contact in the starters, not so bad. We need guys who throw strikes. Those are the guys who are starters, because if you don't throw strikes, you can't get deeper into games. You can't throw 6 innings. Throw strikes, let your defense back you up. And then we'll have, when the game's on the line in the eighth and ninth, those guys who throw 100 can come out and be your closers. I think that pretty much sums up the way the Cardinals have done it historically. And you can even look at the way they've drafted in somewhat recent years. Michael McGreevy is a guy that they picked in the first round. Why? Because he had great command through strikes. But does he have the upside to get into a rotation at the big league level and be a number two or be an ace? I don't think many people have him pegged for that. And that's a development thing, but it's also a drafting thing. Like, are they willing to go after the raw prospects that can turn into stars? Tink Hence is a guy that I think people hope can turn into that. That was a unique circumstance, though, when they picked him in 2020, because they took a bunch of high school guys because college seasons didn't happen, and they said, we might as well zig where we would usually zag, because we don't really know a lot about these college players anyway. Let's draft a Jordan Walker. Let's draft a Mason Wynn and a Tink Hence, and let's go for upside. And what do you know? Like, even though Walker's kind of struggling right now, I think everybody looks at that draft as being the one you can hang your hat on in recent years for the Cardinals. So it is a deep conversation that I think we could take 2 hours and explain it instead of just a 1 hour podcast, where it's like, do the Cardinals need to look at things a little bit differently and maybe not pigeonhole a guy into a bullpen role just because he can objectively thrive in it today? What are you costing the team down the road? Because, man, having that starter throwing on 750,000 who could be more than just like a Zach Thompson, maybe he's a number six, maybe he's a number five. Like, a lot of these guys have a guy come up and they're great, and you're not paying them. And that gives you the luxury to then be a little bit aggressive in free agency. When a Jordan Montgomery's price falls and he doesn't take 4 years to sign, boom, now you can afford that luxury. The Cardinals have perennially been in a spot where they don't feel they can do that because they're just having to backfill for $11 million in free agency. But what's interesting is they could have done this with Hicks if they wanted to, right? He signed the Steven Matz contract, identical, 4 years, 44 million. And the Giants, I think, are one of the best teams in baseball at getting the most out of pitchers and saying, hey, throw this pitch a little bit more, take a little bit off this one. Here's what you need to do. The Giants deserve credit for, if this is sustainable, for Jordan Hicks having a 1 ERA through 3 starts. The Giants are going to deserve a lot of credit for that. It's always what Jordan wanted to do. But for whatever reason, it's that change of scenery thing, just like with the outfielders. They needed a change of scenery. They need to. Why is it always from St. Louis? Why is that the scenery that all these guys are getting the change of, and then they're going out elsewhere and performing? It's a little bit of a bummer when you can look internally and go, they don't have that guy that they've been able to develop as a starter and get that type of performance from. It's you throw your hands up, man. That's all you can do. But I think it is a deep conversation that you could look organizationally and go, why does this keep happening? Why is this something that took place again with a guy who came up as a starter and thrived until you said, let's make him a reliever?
Right. And I think that is what is important to note about Jordan Hicks that sometimes we forget unless you go back there. You know, sometimes you understand. Like, look at Zach Thompson, for example. Zach Thompson, towards the end, I don't want to say of his minor league career, but he was struggling as a starter to a point where maybe it opens up the conversation. Do we turn him into a reliever? Jordan Hicks was different. Jordan Hicks, I'm looking right now in 2016 in 12 starts in A ball rookie, 2.97 ERA. The next year, two teams, A and advanced A, 2.74, 19 starts. He was very young. He was a successful starter in the minors on that trend, but they put him into the bullpen immediately and he became a reliever and he never really got that shot again besides the 1 year with the weird opener. He also had look, maybe if you were going to give him another shot, remember he had the COVID, obviously, where he opted out. He had Tommy John. He had some weird stuff. But with what you're saying, I think is very interesting about not just pitchers, more so outfielders. We'll get to Tyler O'Neill. Why is the change of scenery always working when they leave? Why are we not getting that positive bump in the change of scenery when people come here? And remember, I say we as Cardinal Nation, we had that for years with Dave Duncan. So if you don't think that's possible, that Dave Duncan can take some of these reclamation projects, guys that throw hard four seamers, turn them into two seamers, sinker slider, pitch to contact. I mean, for 10, 15 years, we saw the Cardinals use that coaching staff advantage. It seems like the Cardinals no longer have that and other teams do. Um, Hicks, the outfielders, I don't even know what the outfielders, if it's coaching, if it's more as developing, understanding what you have before you let that person walk, you know?
Yeah, I would say though, like there are examples where you could say they've had guys come here and then their career does take off, but it's mostly been the ones that come to mind for me anyway, a very specific type of trade that gets made. It's a guy that's extra on your bench that you trade for sort of a middling reliever that's not totally proven or that's not, an obvious closer. And then he comes Giovanni Gallegos is an example of that. They traded Edmundo Sosa to get JoJo, and JoJo has now established himself as a guy that you can rely upon in late innings in St. Louis. And so like those are the examples where I would say like credit to the Cardinals for identifying and making those types of trades. You trade Luke Voigt, you get back a guy who's a staple in your bullpen for 5 years. Kittredge for Palacios is another one that it's very, very early, but I think we both are looking at that deal going, yeah, that's pretty good the way the Cardinals were able to get another reliable arm into their bullpen. But yeah, they haven't really necessarily done that too frequently. It's because I think with position player trades, they they try to squeeze out every last bit of value. And if a guy has trade value in a moment, they're whether it's gun shy or just unwillingness because, well, why would we trade a guy who's playing well? There's never that type. Like, I don't think anybody could find me that kind of trade where you've had a guy who's a starter or a regular on the team, and the Cardinals make the bold decision to trade them at the height of their value, to make a bet almost that, hey, this guy's a good player, but this is probably the height of the value that we're going to have for him. Even when you make a good trade of Bader for Jordan Montgomery, Bader was not at the height of his value, right? He had been injured. They had a chance once upon a time to do that deal for Zach Wheeler, right? Like Bader was one of the outfielders that maybe when he was what was it with the Mets or whoever it was back in the day, that was a deal that maybe was on the table, could have been made. The Cardinals go, we don't want to trade Bader. We think he's our future. He's our present and our future. You can make the case with Dylan Carlson that when he had a height of his value, the Cardinals said, well, no, if he does that for the next decade, we want that guy extended and here and playing daily. But they haven't been able to ever make that trade that's a little bit bold or you extract the most value that you can. This offseason that just happened, people maybe advocated for Nolan Gorman to be a guy they do that with. Is it risky? Hell yeah. Guy could hit 40 homers. But like you said, is he ever going to put it together, be average, batting average guy who also slugs and gets on base and does everything? Like the Cardinals haven't made those types of deals. So when you talk about change of scenery, it seems like they're usually, Tyler O'Neill, great example, trading the guy after they've tried it and tried it and tried it. And for whatever reason, it wasn't working here, rather than, hey, you know what? This guy has a skill set that we might be able to acquire something we need for. And maybe privately, we just don't know if this guy is cut out for it. We think we might be in the optimal moment to sell on this player. That's never been a move that Mozeliak's front office, I think, has been willing to do. And it's hard to say that as a criticism because we can't tell the future out here. We're wrong all the time about guys and say, oh, you got to get him off this team. And then Lane Thomas turns into a competent major league outfielder for a number of years in Washington. So we as the public don't always know. But I always kind of like to say, yeah, but it's their job to know. Like over time,
Hmm.
you're going to be graded and judged on how often you execute those types of deals and get the most for your talent. So it's a mild criticism. I don't want to go overboard and say, yeah, the front office stinks. They've had some good success. But in that area in particular, it's interesting that it's always kind of 1 year late that they seem to be unloading these guys. And O'Neill, they were done with him. They said, we're going to get what we can for him. And everybody knew he'd go to Boston, and if he's healthy, he'd be good. So here we are.
Yeah, I think to me it's just the trend. The trend line is low. I don't remember anything John Mozeliak having any mistakes like this his first 11 years. The last 5 or so, there's been a lot of them. And like you said, give credit for the JoJos, for the Geos. He's been very savvy usually in the Asian market. If you go back to
Michaelis,
whether it was Michaelis, Sun Wano, KK, obviously, our guy, what was his name? Drew
Drew Verhagen.
Verhagen didn't
Druver,
work
they
out.
they tried, it was a
Right.
low risk signing.
But again, savvy moves in the Asian market, savvy to pick up some of those nice, solid relievers that you mentioned. But it's just different when all star, Cy Young, MVP type guys that for whatever reason, I don't even want to get into why every single one of these people left, but it is Sandy Alcantara, Zach Galen, guys, Cy Young caliber. We'll see what happens with Jordan Hicks, but Randy Arozarena, Adolis Garcia, all star MVP vote caliber. We know Tyler O'Neill is MVP vote caliber. My thing with Tyler O'Neill is look, doesn't surprise me, but it won't surprise me if he gets hurt. It won't surprise me if he doesn't have a great year next year. My thing with Tyler is different because no matter what anybody wants to say, okay, did Ollie not lose the clubhouse last year? Sure, I'll agree with that. He for sure lost Tyler O'Neill. I'll tell you that. And Tyler O'Neill admitted that on Foul Territory. It became relationship. He called it respect at arm's length. So, Ollie, if you had to call him out, you had to call it his manhood. You had to call out his effort, right? You lost the player to a point where you had to trade him. I understand trading him, but you traded a dude in a walk year that has the potential in any given year to be an MVP caliber player, and you got a reliever that's not on your big league roster for him. And I think that's a big part of this. At the end of Tyler O'Neill, you essentially had to break up the relationship because of the way he was treated. And let's be real, you didn't get very much for him. Now, if Nick Robertson becomes JoJo or Geo in the next couple of years, I'll change my mind on that. But right now, you got one guy. Tyler O'Neill leads the league in everything right now. Literally, on base 489, slug 857, OPS 1346, OPS plus 282, 6 bombs, 13 runs. I don't think it's going to continue. I think the Tyler one is very complex, but I do think the way Ollie handled the base running thing last year ruined that relationship for the future.
Yeah. I mean, I think that played a part in it. I also think, though, for the Cardinals, it's like you said, well, why does it keep happening that the outfielders, like, they keep choosing the wrong ones, basically?
Hmm.
They keep
Yes.
backing the wrong horse. And it's uncanny that it keeps happening the way that it's happened. But I think the change of scenery factor is one that maybe there's always going to be a benefit to that guy who goes elsewhere with a chip on his shoulder because he didn't get the playing time or didn't, even if it wasn't a case of adversarial relationship with management, maybe just didn't get the playing time. Like Adolis Garcia never really got a shot. Rosarena never really got a full scale shot for more than a few games at a time. And so that can propel a player perhaps to say, oh, I'll show them. Like, I don't know. I haven't asked those guys that, but is that maybe in the back of their mind at some point in the early goings of their career? I wouldn't doubt it for a second. So like that contributes to it as well. But it's just like if you've got five outfielders in a given, a given spring or a given season where you say, hey, next year we got to trim this to four, they continue to say, well, they wanted Libertor. They thought, hey, we've done this thing at developing starters where we kind of sort of stink at it. So maybe this guy who was a first round pick, we can get him. He's a lefty. He's lanky. He throws hard. Like this is what we need. And right now, if we're going to say we've got five outfielders, a Rosarena might be the third best one. And we might even think that internally, but they're making a trade with us like he's our best player. So we need to go ahead and do this deal because we're going to get something that we don't have for something that we feel like we've got plenty of. And it's just uncanny that they keep then the guys that are in their outfield keep kind of underperforming by 10% or 8%. And then the guy that they thought was maybe their, even if they thought internally that he was better than Bader or better than who, at the time, Carlson or whoever it was, they say, well, they're asking, this is the guy that can get this deal done, and we need a Libertor. And then the guy that's the Libertor doesn't end up filling the role. It's not that everybody just stinks that they acquire. It's like they're a little bit underwhelming. And the guy that they could have kept and put their arms around and said, you're our dude, let's go see it. They said it to somebody else who was maybe he performed like right around league average, like a Dylan Carlson, but he's not great. And a Rosarena is, and a Dulles is, and these other guys are great when they get those opportunities elsewhere. So I know Mozeliak is tired of hearing about it. He made the joke in December when he was asked at the winter meetings, like, yeah, you got a little bit of a surplus on the outfield. You're looking to trade one of these guys. What you've had a Rosarena's happen to you. You've had a Dulles Garcia's happen to you. Are you a little bit worried about that notion? He said, yeah, whoever we trade's probably going to get MVP votes. That was the direct quote. Like, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy at this point, and the Cardinals can't get away from it. It's uncanny, but it's 2024, and we're still talking about it with one of these outcast outfielders.
Yeah, and Adolis Garcia to me, different, late bloomer. Everybody had a shot at him. Randy Arozarena is the main one because you never gave him an opportunity. And look, the Rays don't make a lot of mistakes. So I'd also be
Right.
thinking, well, wait, why do the Rays want this guy so bad that we've never given a shot in the big leagues, but he's been great in the minors? And why are the Rays so ready to punt on Libitor a couple years in a first round pick? Like, let's think
Yeah.
about that too. They usually don't make mistakes uh, on the level we've seen the Cardinals make the last several years. I think with Tyler O'Neill, what bugs me about that, and I think this plays a lot into it in organizations. If a player is drafted, if there's people in that room that are still in the organization that drafted that guy, they always see the best in him. They don't want to move those guys because it's a bad look when your big time draft pick doesn't pan out. And that's probably why somebody like Dylan Carlson is always going to get 5,000 opportunities, right? Because, oh, he's their guy. He was the number one pick. There's people in the organization. They all vouch for him. Tyler O'Neill came in a trade. It's different. Tyler O'Neill, he had the great year. He was always hurt. He had the thing with Ollie. My thing is with Tyler, though, we saw it. We saw an eighth in the MVP season. We have never seen anything like that from Dylan Carlson, and he gets 5,000 opportunities.
Yeah, but I would say this, like they came into last year not doing it that way. Tyler is the guy that got opportunities to begin last year. They even said you're going to be the center fielder. Now it
Mhm.
went so horrifically bad within a week that you look back and he only played center field like 10 times in the season. Like it didn't end the year that way. But Dylan was kind of the guy that on paper was boxed out coming into the year because the Cardinals said, look, this guy, Tyler, is coming on. He's a couple of years from being able to walk. We know what the raw material says. We could use a guy that can lock down and stabilize center field while hitting the way that he can, because then you can play an upcoming Lars Nootbaar in the corner, or you can play some of these other guys like Burleson and maybe they thought ahead to Jordan Walker. That guy can play in the corner, and we've got a center fielder that's just doing it all. We got a star out there. So they tried to make Tyler O'Neill happen in St. Louis, at least initially. But like you said, sometimes behind the scenes there might be some friction where, hey, we spent a first round pick on this other guy. Are we really gonna? And then all he sees what he perceives as a lack of hustle in the first week of the season, and he goes, "This is ridiculous. I'm really having to play this guy, and this is what he's given me." Like, I'm not saying that's exactly what happened, but you can sort of see how that would be framed for a manager when internally, organizationally, they might be looking at other guys going, "This is really what I'd rather do," but we kind of feel like we're tied to this other thing. So that's maybe where some of that friction can develop too. It is a really interesting conversation. It's kind of beating a dead horse at the same time, but when the horse keeps being revived every summer, it's like we still have to keep talking about it because it's the same story but with a new player each and every time it happens.
And the crazy one, I'm not predicting this, but if this were to happen with Dylan Carlson too
Oh, dude,
in a year or two,
I
because
need
like
it.
my
I
thing,
crave it. I
right?
really
No,
do.
it's great
'Cause
for
I like Dylan
business.
Carlson. I want him to
No,
do well.
so do I. I just think with Tyler O'Neill, it's the Cardinals' fault in the relationship that it got to this point. It's Tyler's fault in always being hurt, and it is Tyler's fault. He should have hustled. But with 1 year left in his walk year, it got to a point that you needed a change of scenery so bad that you had to move him, and every other team knew you were leveraged and you didn't get anything, relatively speaking, for him. I think if you'd have traded him for an Andrew Kittredge,
Yeah.
people would have understood. But it got to a point where the value was essentially gone. And I think that's what people have now seen with Dylan Carlson. You did the same thing now with Dylan Carlson, probably.
And the difference between Tyler and Carlson is, like you said, even though Carlson had a 780 OPS one year, which is pretty good, that's like the Newt bar. Like if Newt bar continues to have 780, 800 OPS, you're like, well, Lars Newt bar is great, but then you go, well, that's still not an 850 OPS. Like, what is Lars Newt bar, and is he ever going to stay healthy? Like that, you don't ever want that to be the next conversation. But 2 years ago, or even like last year, you go, well, Lars Newt bar, obviously he's the present and the future. I mean, he's a superstar, but like until you see those numbers, and those are the guys that you're putting your weight behind to be able to play every day. Those guys have to turn into great and not, 109 OPS plus, which is pretty good. Whatever Newt's was, 114, like that's pretty good. But yeah, you're kind of ultimately there's only three spots in that outfield, and then you deal with the DH too. You've got to figure out a way to prioritize the right guys, and they continue to kind of not make that happen. And with O'Neill, almost out of spite, like it's easy to say now because he's looking great. And I knew they were trading him. Like I knew they wouldn't get to camp and he would be on that team. It wasn't tenable.
He
But
said
almost
that,
as uh,
Mozeliak.
he did. And so when Mo says it publicly, it's not. I mean, it was just automatic. He was going to be dealt for anything they could get. And Nick Robertson in a minor league pitcher that we won't see for a while ends up being the answer to that. Almost out of spite, you could said, screw it. We're not letting this happen again, even though this situation is not tenable. It's like, Tyler, you're sticking here, and you'll either play or you won't, or whatever will happen, but we will not let this happen again. When they knew they were almost trading him as like a kind of like a pseudo salary dump, because they weren't going to get a difference maker necessarily for him at that point because of where the value had gotten. I think there are some Cardinals fans who would go, out of spite, they should have just said, like, not spite toward Tyler, but spite toward their past mistakes. It's like, we physically will not allow this to happen again with this guy. And it was like a situation tailor made for it to happen when you look at the raw materials that O'Neill is dealing with. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer would have been. Clubhouse stuff matters too. And if it wasn't tenable in the clubhouse, then it wasn't tenable in the clubhouse. But like you said, is that really all on Tyler that wasn't the case? Like, these are fair topics, in my opinion.